In 1985, Apple spent $1 million to air a Super Bowl commercial. Yes, in so doing, they became the first company to spend seven figures on airtime. It was a complete disaster. The iPhone maker, historically, has been synonymous with human creativity, a trait that would be almost impossible to shake, but, well, in 1985, Apple's Super Bowl commercial, it did exactly that. What's ironic is the year before, Apple made what is largely considered to be the greatest Super Bowl ad ever. What was it about the sequel in 1985 that gave the company such an about face? How did the Super Bowl even get to a place where it could charge a cool $1 million just for airtime? The Super Bowl didn't become the mecca of advertising, where marketing agencies demonstrated their master strokes, until Apple seized that opportunity. For Apple, the Super Bowl was not just a chance to borrow mind share en masse, but to shape culture. For Apple, the Super Bowl was an attempt to convert ads into art. For Apple, the Super Bowl was where they made their loudest statements. And for Apple's founder, Steve Jobs, the Super Bowl both helped gain his company notoriety and eventually cost him his job. So, what was wrong with the 1985 ad? Why was it so disliked compared to its 1984 version? Well, there's a first of everything, and this is the story of the first Super Bowl commercial to cost over $1 million in airtime, the $1 Million Minute. I'm Paul Neihart, I'm your host, and we'll get through this one together. $80 million Americans watched Apple's 1985 Super Bowl ad. It was a 30-second spot, which was $500,000 that year. But Apple, they needed two spots for their 60-second ad. So they purchased two 30-second spots together, which, you carry the one, multiply by pi r squared. Yeah, it ended up being $1 million. $1 million minute. Yeah. But to understand why Apple chose the Super Bowl to take its $1 million swing, we need to look at how the event became so popular and what role Apple played in creating this popularity. The Super Bowl's reach and impact on American culture makes it almost impossible not to parallel it with ancient Rome, particularly the Roman affinity towards sports. Now, there was a gentleman named Juvenal back in the day. He was a famous Roman poet from 1st century AD. You've never heard of him. Now, he criticized Roman citizens for their complacency. He claimed that they traded their autonomy for bread and circuses, aka spectacle and sport. He lamented their shift from wielding power to merely seeking entertainment and food. He said, and I'll quote him, "The public has long since cast off its cares. The people that once bestowed commands, consulships, legions, and all else, now meddles no more and longs eagerly only for two things: bread and circuses." Say, what do you think Juvenal would make of modern-day America? Here's a couple of stats. The vast majority of the top-viewed TV programs in America are games. Even the 2024 presidential debate only drew half the viewership of that year's Super Bowl, which suggests a potential inclination towards entertainment versus civic engagement. As Juvenal saw it, Romans used to have power, but they gave it away for the thrill of the game and the joy of good food. Romans corrupted themselves with complacency. And Romans said, yes, and boy does it taste good. Now, Super Bowl commercials, if nothing else, confirm and affirm the American way of life. Through the celebration of our most popular and growing companies, Americans show their loyalties are aligned less with the Republic and more to its sub-brands. The Super Bowl is the stage, yes, where the best athletes perform, but where most significantly, it's where those brands show us who they are and why we belong with them. Super Bowl commercials reflect America's shift towards entertainment and brand loyalty over civic discourse. Major companies use the event to define their identity and consumer belonging. Whoa! This is getting awful heavy, huh? Why do I bring this up? I bring it up because it was Apple that led this charge. Apple did more than just fork over a bunch of big bucks for a commercial. They redefined commercials and used the Super Bowl to do so. Their 1984 commercial changed what commercials even are. In 1985, to their Apple's chagrin, their attempt to shape American culture once again, well, it fell off a cliff. To understand where this 1985 commercial, their second Super Bowl commercial, went wrong, we can compare it to what they did the year before. Apple's 1984 Super Bowl commercial was their first foray into producing commercials during the Super Bowl. It created a cult status for a company that people had heard of, but hadn't yet really felt an overt connection to. Now that all changed with this 60-second spot, one that not so ironically discouraged capitulation and encouraged the death of cult complacency. What was most striking about the commercial is that it wasn't a commercial. It was technically a short film, yeah. At only 1 minute long, how could it be confused with a major motion picture? Well, look no further than the director. 5 years prior to the debut of this Super Bowl commercial, the movie Alien was the 6th highest grossing film of the year. 3 years later, another film came out. With much critical acclaim, it's still well known today. It's one of the most popular sci-fi films of all time. It's called Blade Runner. Now, both of these major motion pictures had at least one thing in common: their director. They were directed by Ridley Scott, now Sir Ridley Scott. Yeah. Apple hired Ridley Scott to direct their 1 minute commercial that was announcing the release of the Macintosh computer. Now, prior to the Mac, computers were viewed almost exclusively as equipment used to get work done. They were as boring as an office chair and hopefully as productive. Apple saw computers not as office equipment, but as devices to express oneself, to create, not just produce. And it was their 1984 Super Bowl commercial that was meant to send this message home. Now, the commercial fancied itself after the George Orwell book 1984. George Orwell, as many of us know, predicted a future where a single overlord would control the world through the medium of technology. And Apple used their 1 minute spot to flip the script, to throw the hammer down. Now, the commercial opens in a large prison. Dozens of foot soldiers march mindlessly in unison, melded together by a towering voice that emanates from a large screen ahead. The pawns march their way to their seats, sitting, listening blankly, to a master barking orders at them through the large projection just right ahead. Now, after a few beats, there emerges a woman from the shadows. She's running steadfast towards the man barking at everyone but seemingly her. She clutches a large hammer. She's clad in clothes of clearly her own choosing. They're loose-fitting ones at that. She continues to run. She moves closer to the man projected onto the screen, intent on destroying the communications and to silence its puppet master. Guards in clunky armor with heavy weapons and a distaste for the disarray chase after her. She arrives just a few feet from the screen, the man still barking, the guard still chasing, the woman ready to destroy. One swing, two swing. The hammer lets go from the woman's hands on the third heave. It implodes on impact, destroying the voice, its face, and whatever dystopian future it had planned with it. Through the must, dust, and residue, a new voice comes on the screen. Here it is.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
And like that, with a single commercial, Apple, the company we largely know it as of today, wasn't born, but it was brought to life. It killed both the present and the past, giving itself the first crack at the future. Apple's 1984 Super Bowl ad, though macabre, celebrated empowerment, diversity, and the freedom to discover oneself, to take matters into your own hands. And as a reward, Apple sold some computers. 70,000 within 100 days of the ad. It generated an estimated 120 million bucks. So from Apple's perspective, there had to be no question that a year later, in 1985, the sequel to their 1984 Ridley Scott directed commercial was going to be an even bigger hit. It was a shoo-in. 1984 was to be like 1985. Full-page ads were taken out of the Sunday newspaper. It told people, whatever you do, don't go to the bathroom during the fourth quarter when the ad would air, or you'll be sorry. It's a literal quote. Now, in 1985, their Super Bowl ad was called Lemmings, what would unofficially be the sequel to the greatest advertisement of all time. It was named after the rodent that mythically engages in mass suicide. Kind of see where we're going with this one, huh? It opens in a similar fashion to the 1984 ad. There's dozens of office workers, and they walk single file. They're blindfolded. They're clad in business suits, briefcases in hand, and they're following each other's footsteps to God knows where. Unlike the 1984 ad, they aren't listening to a voice. They're seemingly just following a status quo. Hi ho, it's off to work they go, they whistle underneath themselves. The workers continue to proceed through what looks like a dusty hellscape, not paying any attention to the thunderous clouds towering above them. They simply march forward. Hi ho, hi ho, hi ho, hi ho. One by one, their march comes to an end. No, they don't stop. They simply run out of real estate. Each office worker, dust on their business suits, still clutching their briefcase, falls head over feet off a cliff towards a fiery death. A mass suicide so habitual, so subconscious, it can only be compared to something scores of rodents would partake in. Lemmings, as it were. The commercial was beyond dark. It was repugnant. The modern-day version of Too Extra. With the commercial, Apple was marketing a new product targeted explicitly to office workers, and they managed to offend this exact customer in the process. Turned off by the assertion that office workers are voluntarily killing themselves, coupled with the fact that the product wasn't really ready to go to market, it's safe to say customers were turned away from Apple. As irony would have it, viewers were sorry they hadn't gone to the bathroom that fourth quarter. And it was Apple's the one that had something to actually apologize for. Of course, with any situation like this, it didn't end there. The ad was the kind of offering that cost people their jobs, namely Steve Jobs. He lost his job because of this. Yeah. But for some context, a few weeks after the Lemmings ad, Steve Jobs was quoted as saying this in a magazine interview. He said, "We didn't build Mac for anybody else. We built it for ourselves. We were the group of people who were going to judge whether it was great or not. We weren't going to go out and do some market research. We just wanted to build the thing we know we could build." Now, it is this interview where he is attributed to saying one of his most popular quotes. And that quote is, "It's not the customer's job to know what they want." The Steve Jobs interview was published on February 1st, 1985, less than 2 weeks after Apple's dubious Super Bowl commercial. But unlike their 1984 ad, the 1985 ad crushed Apple's sales. They badly missed projections. Revenues were only 10% of what Steve Jobs said it would be. 6 months after the ad, Steve Jobs, he was famously fired. Poor sales and a power struggle with the CEO. Yes, the CEO that he had oddly hired as one of the founders of the company. Well, either way, they were his undoing. Juvenile never would have accused Jobs of giving away his power. Jobs believed that it was his and Apple's duty to set people free from technology. Technology wasn't a transaction, robbing people of their agency. It was a transformative offering, providing new possibilities. Jobs viewed it as Apple's responsibility to make this belief proprietary and to embed it in every one of their products and their services. Now, born out of this belief was the mantra that, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. And in 1999, 15 years later, Apple returned and made their final Super Bowl commercial. the company that had all but invented the Super Bowl ad and was the first to pay over $1 million for airtime, well, they gave this game another try, a final try. The year 1999 offered a fitting return as a purported Y2K bug, I think we all remember this, was set to bring chaos to the digital world. Now, Apple advertised that it was the only technology company prepared for what needed to come in the year 2000 and beyond. Their message was quite clear. Apple understood, even if its customers didn't, what would be required, not just now, but in the future. Apple knew to read things that were not on the page. Despite the $1 million ad flopping, Apple would eventually go on to become the first trillion-dollar company. And for a population craving food and games, Apple has proven what people really, really expect from a company. It isn't to give them power or freedom or good luck or good health. They're looking for a company to tell them what they want. So now, you know the story of the first Super Bowl commercial that cost over $1 million in airtime. I'm Paul Neihart, reminding you to be first when you should, last when you shouldn't. I'll see you next time.